Congress passed the law 90 years ago, and ATF is catching
So you're
up to
saying to me that a
technology.
law that Congress passed 90 years ago allows for 10 million Americans to become felons today?
Congress passing a law allows ATF to regulate as technology changes.
Come on, Mr. Wilcox, don't do that to the American people. We know better. Don't do that.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, I find it interesting that my colleagues have no problem with the ATF going outside its boundaries with respect to this brace. Meanwhile, my colleagues have no issue with the fact that the President of the United States has made a complete bastardization of asylum at the southern border, which has led to more fentanyl killing more people between the ages of 18 and 45 in the United States. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of Americans in the United States. And they have no problem talking about that. They don't even want to discuss it. But we're here talking about this. Ms. Swearer, you just saw the video that was up on the screen. Do you have a response for this video?
Yes, though I suppose Mr. Bosco does as well. I think it's being used in a way to misconstrue the reality of SBRs. Like SBRs are actually still used by plenty of Americans who do have disabilities, but also just from the standpoint of SBRs themselves, they were the loophole, an attempt to regulate a loophole while trying to essentially ban handguns. Their restriction under the NFA has always been irrational. This idea that somehow a 14.5-inch barrel is more concealable than a 16.5-inch barrel when you walk in to commit a mass shooting, and that's why they choose it. It's just not realistic. It's the same gun. If you take that same gun and put it in a 16-inch barrel, if anything, the muzzle velocity will be increased when it is fired. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I'm sure Mr. Bosco has some thoughts on that as well.
I mean, Mr. Bosco, you're the inventor. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks. You know, I think there's a lot of people online, and we've seen some of those videos. The reason I invented the brace was for people with limited mobility. Well, that was the inception. That was why I made it. It was for a friend. Yes, there are people that are not using my product the way that I've designed it to be used, but the intent has always been that. The idea that by adding a brace to a pistol makes the firearm more concealable and therefore more dangerous is laughable. It's a piece of plastic. It weighs a certain amount. It makes the firearm longer. It's not making the firearm more concealable. It's making it less concealable.
Mr. Bosco, let me ask you a question. How many Americans do you think will become felons as a result of this rule?
Well, I think we should probably look at what Congressional Research Services did. They came up with a study that said anywhere between 10 and 40 million Americans own arm braces at this moment. If we use the smallest number that they have, which is 10 million, you will have an effect that come, I believe it's May 16th, which is the deadline. If someone wasn't smart enough to look up the Federal Register, who didn't know about this rule, from one day to the next, he will be in possession of an unregistered short-barreled rifle, and he will be committing a crime which is punishable of up to 10 years in prison. It's a felony offense, $250,000 fine.
So in order to avoid this, the American would have to spend $200, get their fingerprints taken, get a photo of them given to the ATF. Am I correct in that?
So the agency, even with this, has flip-flopped back and forth. Originally, they were suggesting that Americans pay $200.
And Mr. Bosco, not to totally cut you off, let me ask you this question real quick. Did Congress pass a law to stipulate the ATF do this?
Unequivocally, no.
Mr. Wilcox, how you doing? Fellow Brooklynite over here. Grew up the same time. Let me ask you this question. Do you think it's okay for the ATF to act outside of congressional legislative authority, criminalizing 10 million Americans who are currently law-abiding citizens?
It's good to see another proud son of Brooklyn. I don't believe that is what ATF is doing here, so I disagree with the premise.
Do you think that by this rule, there will not be 10 million felons in the United States because they bought a product that the ATF authorized to be sold, and that the ATF said was legal up until the Biden administration?
So not liking a law isn't a reason for ATF not to.
Well, Mr. Wilcox, there's no law. Congress didn't pass it. That's a rule from ATF. Let me ask you this question. Do you believe in separation of powers?
Of course,
Do you believe that the legislative power resides within the congressional body and not the executive?
I do.
So then why do you think it's okay for the ATF to come up with some rule with the force of law that Congress did not pass?
Congress passed the law 90 years ago, and ATF is catching
So you're
up with
saying to me that a
technology.
law that Congress passed 90 years ago allows for 10 million Americans to become felons today?
Congress passing a law allows ATF to regulate as technology changes.
Come on, Mr. Wilcox, don't do that to the American people. We know better. Don't do that. I yield.